Releasing old trauma or stored survival stress. I get this question all the time, and I want to tell you there's hope. And sometimes people have been stuck for so long and they know that they've already overcome the situation and they've created a much different life. They're in a much different place. They can look around and see that life's actually safe, and yet their body feels like it is carrying all the weight, the imprint from things that have happened before, maybe in childhood, maybe in a previous relationship or loss or something that they experienced, but they just can't quite break free. How we know it's not released and what we need to do to release it. Hello, my name is Rochelle. I have been a complex trauma therapist for many years, dealing with brain-based strategies for creating new pathways so that people can break free from chronic patterns of stress and release trauma from their system. So here's the deal. Too many times we get stuck in talking about trauma. There's a lot of value initially in having an empathic witness, meaning that somebody hears our story, understands what we've been through, we're able to put voice to it, and we get some empathy from that, and we're able to have compassion. But too many times people have done that. They have shared that, they have thought about it, they have worked really hard to move past it, and yet they are stuck in a state of chronic fight or flight because even though they've talked about the trauma, it has not been resolved. Now, if you are in this situation and you wonder, has my trauma been resolved? Ask yourself, am I present and engaged in the here and now, or am I stuck in old patterns of rumination? Am I triggered? If you're triggered, then the trauma has not been resolved, because if the trauma were resolved, you wouldn't still be experiencing triggers to the same degree. It's not to say that that if you experience triggers, you haven't done significant trauma work. It just means it's still there. And we can learn ways to create pathways of safety so that we're not constantly like whack-a-mole beating down triggers. I don't believe we should live in a state where we're always battling triggers. If something is still really triggering, it has not been reprocessed by the brain. And we're not actually remembering that event, but we're reliving that event. So if you go back to something that happened 10, 20, 30 years ago, 2 years ago, and as you think about that event, your body starts re-experiencing the symptoms and you feel distress, or you find yourself caught in avoidance patterns. Like, I don't like to think about that thing. I don't even want to go there because it's going to be too overwhelming. Then you're still stuck in that reaction, and it's not your fault. Because a lot of methods out there give the wrong information about how we can actually work with that part of the brain. So trauma is stored in the lower parts of our brain where fight or flight is turned on and off. It's traumatic memory is not time-stamped by the hippocampus. So basically what that means is, we can't reason our way out of it. So we may have read all the good books, listened to the good podcasts, we may be saying all the right things to ourselves, but inside, that autonomic nervous system is still responding to that fight or flight. It's really important to know when this is happening. If you've got chronic high blood pressure, gut disturbances, you feel like you're always on, all tabs open in your brain, this hypervigilance, doesn't feel okay to relax, these are all indications that you're living in chronic stress, and that might be from past trauma that's happened, maybe even years ago. Chronic stress can also be, it's always habituated, right? The system becomes used to it, and we're used to that cortisol and the adrenaline, and it has pathways in our brains that have beliefs attached to them, body sensations attached to them, chemical reactions that happen in our body attached to them. So it's very important to understand that if we are going to release stored stress from trauma, or we're going to break patterns of chronic stress, that our approach is going to have to be one kind of like if you were going to rebuild your body and you were going to use muscle memory and really work on something to create new pathways, mind-body connection, building of muscle. When we are talking about neuroplasticity, we're talking about creating new pathways in the brain for a state of calm. Otherwise, talking about trauma simply loops us back to the same nervous system reactions we had at the time. You can talk about it for 20 years and it's not going to change it. You have to actually create those new pathways and reprocess that information so that you can live with a felt sense of safety. You can get out of that hypervigilance where you're always waiting for something to happen or feeling like you constantly have to be on. The inability to rest is really hard on our nervous system, our brain, our body, our relationships, everything. So learning to have stillness exercises that really work through the nervous system, not thinking about it, not talking about it, doesn't mean that there aren't some real core beliefs that we need to work on, imprints that came from those experiences that we need to work on. But those are in the subconscious mind, not what we think and know up here. So working through strategies that allow our body to calm and still, and instituting those practices on a daily basis allow us to change the way our brain and our body is experiencing the world and processing information. And when we can bring that level of hypervigilance down, turn off the fight or flight, then we can go in and work with those subconscious beliefs, those that don't really align with us. Like we may know I'm safe right now, I've got a perfectly good life, and yet we feel like we always have to be on edge. Or we may tell other people, you don't have to be perfect, no one's perfect. And yet inside we hold ourselves to that standard. Those are some of the subconscious programs that we want to tweak, but we can't do that if we're in a state of chronic stress, because when we're in a hypervigilant state, we're all up here, right? Stuck in our head. So we really need to be able to calm that so that we can make adjustments to those core programs. Another thing that we need to be able to do is move through emotions with confidence. So increasing emotional capacity has a great impact on the perceived stress, because if we think that something's going to be stressful, but we have confidence that we're going to be able to move through it and not be overwhelmed or not be sidelined in life for the day because things have gotten too hard, or we just, want to pull the covers over our head and not get up. If we can move through things with confidence, emotional confidence, have increased emotional capacity, the world becomes a lot less scary. And a lot of times with stress or traumas that have been held in the body, there's just some really intense emotional experience that our body is holding on to. And to be able to really release those, we need to increase our confidence in being able to move through emotions so that we can move through those and release those and not be stuck in a situation where they're trying to outperform emotions, numb emotions, ignore emotions, shame ourselves for having emotions. None of those things work. How do we know when something's released? If you can go back to a difficult memory and have it come up and yet your body stays neutral, that's a very great indication that that memory has been time-stamped, that it's appropriately placed in the past, and that you can have felt safety now when you recall that memory. If you go back to a memory and it feels like you have that thought and all of a sudden all the same body sensations come up, that's a memory that needs more work reprocessing. It's never too late, whether you've had, a state of chronic stress or, repressed trauma that's been there for years, or whether or not you've just been through a really hard life event and adapted to that, high state of fight or flight, and now you don't know how to shut it off. No matter what the situation, we get a new set of neurons every day. We can always reprogram those. We are able to create new pathways, but it's very much like if we were going to do a physical exercise and develop new muscles. We would rely on repetition, we would rely on consistency, we would rely on safety within the move so that we weren't getting hurt. And small significant shifts done consistently bring about great transformation in the mind and the body. And it does not have to take years. It does not have to take years. The other thing I would say is that with these exercises, yes, there's some things that are universally good. Breath work is one of those things. But then there's a lot of individual nuances. So for instance, meditation can be very helpful. For some, if someone with trauma tries to close their eyes and meditate, it might be very dysregulating. So there's some individual nuances, but bottom line is to release stored trauma and stress, we have to work through the body and through the nervous system first before we can work on those core beliefs and emotional regulation. So start there. Start with breath work. I do have a 90-day program where I take people through really that time of teaching and support and training so that they can go from overwhelmed to calm and confident in their emotions and be people who are really just wonderful at moving through life without responding as if every day is a constant stressor. So if you like this video, please subscribe, and you can watch the training below if you're interested in knowing more about how the brain works and what's really necessary for calming a stress response. So Secrets to a Calm Mind, there's a link for that video below, and it educates you about not only the science of what happens in the brain and the body and what strategies are needed, but also tells about my program where I help women get to emotional freedom. So hope this was helpful. See you in the next training. Bye.